again. Welcome again to the keynote stage. We're here for our second conversation this morning, our second presentation from Alex Vaughan, CEO of Costain. Alex joined Costain in 1992 and has been a member of the executive board since 2006. Alex is going to be talking to us today about joining the dots, how to create an integrated ecosystem which drives economic growth, catalyses positive social change and safeguards our planet. I'll keep it to that and I'll please welcome Alex Vaughan to the stage.
Thank you, and thanks very much for that introduction. And yeah, good morning everyone. So I'm Chief Executive of Costain, and thank you for the opportunity to just say a few words. I'm going to talk about the opportunity again, because I've heard so much chatting to so many people about the opportunity we've got around integrated transport. But I really want to focus on execution, because on the back of what's happened with HS2, I think there's a lot of lessons that we've learned about how are we going to make this happen. So that's what I want to spend my time on. Look, it's been amazing to be able to talk to so many people here at the conference and hear earlier presentations. I was chatting to members of Transport for the North, and it's quite inspiring about how much work and what the opportunity is to really improve people's lives by transforming the performance of our infrastructure ecosystem. And it's really good to see what's happening in Manchester already around working towards having a joined up ecosystem. In actual fact, I used a joined up transport ecosystem to get to here. I drove from home to Heathrow, and I flew from Heathrow to Manchester Airport, and I caught the train from Manchester Airport to here, and I then walked from the airport to here. Now, seamlessly, everything coincided at exactly the same time, but I know that's not strictly the case always. So it's really exciting to see how Manchester is really beginning to think about that whole journey for people. But what do we need to do to deliver our ambition around having an integrated transport system in the backdrop that the National Infrastructure Commission have just launched their second National Infrastructure Assessment that just shows the sheer scale of investment in infrastructure that's needed right across the infrastructure ecosystem to meet the UK's needs, for us to be able to drive positive social change, for us to be able to transform and drive economic growth, and for us to safeguard the future of our planet. £80 billion worth of investment every year, 30% being funded by the government and 70% by private companies. But in today's world, and the economic challenges that the next government is going to pick up and is probably going to have for 10 years, there's going to be a lot of pressure on spending and finance that is going to be a real challenge, because our needs and our demands and what we want to do is going to be a lot more than that. So for me, we need to be a lot smarter. We need to be a lot smarter around how we think about delivering an integrated transport system, and we need to think of it as a system, as a totally integrated system. And that way, we need to look at what can we optimize that we've already got, what can we reconfigure what we've got before we do something, and then make sure that we're thinking about that whole system coming together. And I'll give you an example of where we've been working with Anglian Water, who have got to move water from Hull all the way down to Chelmsford, because there's no water in Chelmsford, but loads of it in Hull. And working with them, we've had to look at the whole network system. And traditionally, we could have just gone and built a 395-kilometre pipeline, and it would have been totally unaffordable and undeliverable. And I think that's the world we live in. But through a digital twin and different engagement with the operators, we've really looked at that system, and we've been able to take 200 kilometres of pipeline out by just reconfiguring what actually has got capacity in the network today. And I think that's a similar approach we need to think. Now, we also then need to look at that ecosystem and join it to some of the strategic national priorities. And I'm really pleased that in meetings I've had with Labour, and I'm not saying that Labour will be the next government, but in the meetings I've had with Labour, they really get that. Having strategic national priorities, but then having very clear local plans that are built on a lot of detail, like has been done with Transport for the North, to turn around and say, right, what is that ecosystem? So I think provided we can have a long-term plan, and by long-term plan, I don't mean 5 years, I'm talking about 10 years, and the challenge I've given to both political parties is actually I think it needs to be 20 years, because that's the level of foresight we need to have if we're going to be successful in really driving transformational change. So that's about the plan, but the other thing we've got to do, and if we look at some of the challenges that we see in the public domain, there are numerous infrastructure projects today that are delivered over budget and late, and then just not predictable. And I think that presents the decision makers who are going to be providing the investment for our infrastructure with a big challenge. How much contingency do I add for what is the uncertainty of how we're going to deliver? And our job is to provide that predictability, and we can. We can have confidence in being able to deliver infrastructure on time, on budget, and over 30% more productive than we do today. But there's a number of changes that we need to make to be able to do that. For example, we do need a long-term plan, because if we want Siemens to invest in building new railway trains and creating a new industrial hub in Goole, we need to be able to give them confidence that you've got 20 years, 30 years worth of work, and you're going to have continuity and consistency. So our integrated integrated transport plan needs to give that long-term confidence so that we can invest, develop our businesses, drive innovation, and really improve. Having a clear pipeline of work that gives us consistency and continuity is invaluable. The other thing is we need to have a portfolio approach to how we deliver infrastructure. We can't go from one project and then that's the only time we do a project. We've got to go from project to project so that we exploit the learning curve and we drive that productivity curve up. There's far too much stop, start, and we just can't afford. If we want to deliver on the ambition, we just can't afford to deliver in the way. We also need to be very clear about the objective of why are we delivering this infrastructure and what's it for. I think HS2 is an example of where we didn't get the objective right, and we need to get the objective right. Now, the objective is very different for very different people. There are some people that all they want is one train to turn up on time. That's all they want. But there are others that want to have a nice seat to sit on, and they want to be able to get there in comfort, and they want Wi-Fi, and they want to arrive in the bus. So we need to be very clear about what are the objectives that we want, because if we have mixed objectives and we try and design for every objective, we will have a gold-plated piece of infrastructure that we just can't afford. And that means we won't be able to invest in other things. Obviously, planning is a big focus for both parties at the moment, Labour and the Conservatives doing a lot of work around planning reform. But there's a big piece here that if we can get the objective right, we can communicate in a better way with the public and get them inspired by what we're going to do, get them inspired by the benefit that this is going to make, which means that they'll want to support the planning system so that we don't have to over-design the infrastructure just because we're giving them all the bells and whistles so that it can get through planning. We can maximise that opportunity. It's really important also that we address some of the political risks that we've got. And for me, the big conversation that we need to have with whoever forms the next government is that we need to empower teams like Transport for the North to be able to deliver their plans because they've done a lot of work and they don't want to be micromanaged by central government, but they obviously need to be aligned. And for me, if we can have a long-term plan and we can deliver infrastructure in a much more predictable way, at more than 30% more productivity than we do today, then the exciting thing is that all of the chatter and the noise that I hear in this room yesterday and today, we can deliver it. and we can really improve people's lives. We can transform the performance of our transport infrastructure, and at the same time, we'll safeguard the future of the planet. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. Some very well-made points there, I think, about clarity of vision and about making things real. I suppose before I hand over to the floor for one or two questions, I suppose from our brief conversation prior, is there a point at which on these major projects, and as you said, HS2 failed miserably in many ways, NPR is seemingly going around and around in circles, at which the politicians must hand over, not to be then allowed back into the game?
Yeah. Look, I think it's a major challenge. It takes 20 years to plan HS2 and 5 seconds to cancel it. And fundamentally, we just made a big mistake with HS2 that we weren't clear from the start as to what its purpose was, what the objective was, and I think we ended up designing something that tried to be everything to everyone and is clearly unaffordable and in economic circumstances. One of the things I've been asking both parties in the meetings I have is, I would like there to be a cabinet minister for infrastructure. I think it's vitally important because our infrastructure ecosystem needs to be joined up, and we can't have the Department of Transport trying to do their thing, with housing doing their thing, with water, energy, and all the other departments segregated. I think we need a cabinet minister responsible for infrastructure, or we give the National Infrastructure Commission more powers. We then need to have long-term plans. We need to enact those plans in an Act of Parliament, which means they can't be stopped and started. And that will give us all confidence that we can get on and deliver the opportunity.
Super, thank you. So we have 7 minutes. Do we have any questions from the floor, please? Gentleman there on the far reaches.
Hi, yes, you talked about smarter choices to protect the ecosystem of the country. I wonder if you can think of a smarter way of getting to Manchester than driving to Heathrow and flying.
I was looking around just waiting for someone to say, you're not doing your carbon footprint, but I do offset. But again, there's a lot of questions about whether planting trees works. Look, I think when I talk to people, and it's interesting chatting to a few people about my journey this morning, it seems to be the first mile and the last mile is the big challenge for people on joining that. Look, I would love to be getting on my Southwest train into London, but the challenge for me is if I catch the train, I go into London, I've then got to navigate across London, and then I've got to catch a train. And the journey time is massively, and it's also unpredictable. I think every other week for the last month, 2 of my trains that I would catch in the morning have been cancelled, and I think that presents, I think it's the predictability that people want, that you can rely on it, and that you can do. Look, we're involved in HS2. We're one of the big contractors on HS2, and I just think creating that capacity would be such an invaluable thing that we'd have needed. But I think Andy spoke about that last night quite a lot.
Do we have any further questions? Please.
Just get a shout. You talk about looking at having clear objectives and having that joined up approach, which I completely agree with. And if we look at projects that probably haven't quite reached the objectives that they initially thought, do you think, in your opinion, that is because that we are not starting from scratch and establishing that strong foundation and baseline to really understand where we're at, where those gaps are, what the issues are? So to give you an example, you say some people just want their train to turn up and some people want comfort. But why aren't the trains turning up and why can't someone sit in a seat? And I think, in your opinion, do you think we're not looking at the baseline enough before we start? And if that's the case, how long do you think it would take us to actually create that baseline?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes we just get fixated with building the infrastructure, and we just think that we need new infrastructure. And if I take my Anglian Water example, what they needed was, the outcome is that people who live in Chelmsford have water. So how do we get them water? And it started off with a big pipeline, and it ended up actually optimizing a lot of the infrastructure that we've got. I don't think that there's enough focus and thought going in to making the hard decisions about what is it we really need to provide. And I think if I look at HS2, it was going to be the fastest railway in Europe. Why? It was going to be, the greenest railway. Okay, we might want that. But fundamentally, if you ask people, they just want connectivity. They just want reliability to get from Leeds, Manchester, Birmingham, to London. And it's having big dramatic impacts by not now having it. Manchester Airport is having to rethink their strategy because they were banking on a load of passengers coming up from Birmingham. So it's not helping us drive economic growth and investment, is it? So I think the problem is that you can't please everyone all the time. Yeah, and you've just got to make choices, and that's the hard bit, and people don't like making choices. I think people want to please the electorate, local residents, because they're worried about planning, and therefore we promise everything.
Sorry. But then do you think we're making those choices based on desired objectives as opposed to the foundation where we're starting from? I think that's my question is, are we looking at what we have in place now before we make those hard decisions?
So I think people like Transport for the North are. I think they've done all the analysis so they know what the public wants. But I think even when we talk in this room, I was chastised by them when I was talking to them earlier about, look, you're talking about a brilliant future. Some people just want a train to turn up, even one an hour, and that they can get a seat that isn't totally full and chock-a-block. So I think that's the bit we need to understand is what is, it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What's the absolute need that we need to meet? And then what are the other things that we might be able to afford, but we're going to make decisions on? And it's not easy.
As the organiser, can I ask a question? I absolutely loved your idea about cabinet member for infrastructure. It cuts across, as you said, energy, water, so environment, housing, etc. All those things where there are potentially quite a few policy conflicts. Any suggestions on how, as a sector, we could kind of get that message heard? Because I think it kind of needs a movement to get behind that idea.
Well, I think the good news is at the moment that the Labour Party is very active in engaging with people. So I think if you think it's a good idea, have a conversation about it. They don't like it. Is what Darren Jones has said to me. He said, look, it just cuts across the way government works. But, if I look at house building, the big challenge we have with house building is we don't put ground source heat pumps in because that's an energy department versus a housing department. We also don't put the water infrastructure in that gets grey water, recycles water,
roads will be active travel,
sustainable solutions, and that's because we're just not joined up, and that's why I would push for it. Or the National Infrastructure Commission would be given more powers. But I think infrastructure is so critically important to the future of our country's prosperity that we need to have someone whose day job is to make sure it happens. But I'm biased because I work for an infrastructure business.
Once again, unfortunately, I think we're out of time. Remains for me to say thank you very much, Alex. Fascinating talk, and I'm sure Alex will be available for further questions during the course of the day. Please show your appreciation for Alex.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity.